For 17 years, she served his family in silence, pouring his morning coffee and polishing the silver frames that held his most cherished memories. But the woman in the teal uniform held a devastating truth closer than any heirloom. The son he believed he had saved through adoption was, in fact, biologically hers. He is a self-made billionaire, a man who built an empire from nothing and believed adopting a son was his greatest act of charity. She is Elena Vasquez, the quiet, devoted housekeeper who has watched the boy grow from infancy, guarding a truth that could shatter their world. This is the story of a lie that built a family, and the moment that secret began to crack under the weight of a single, unavoidable question. Our story begins not in the mansion, but in two separate worlds of desperation. In 2005, Alexander Thorne was a 35-year-old tech visionary whose fortune was matched only by the grief of losing his wife, Claire, to a sudden illness. Their dream of a family was buried with her, until a business associate mentioned a private adoption agency that specialized in discreet, expedited placements for clients of a certain stature. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across the city, 22-year-old Elena Vasquez, a recent immigrant and kitchen assistant, faced a crisis that wealth could not solve. Pregnant, alone, and facing deportation after her work visa lapsed, she was referred to the same agency, the Havenbridge Foundation, by a community clinic nurse. The counselor spoke of a generous, stable family eager to provide everything she could not. The paperwork was a blur of legal terms, but one clause was emphasized: a fully closed adoption. No names, no contact, no future claims. In return, her outstanding medical debts and immigration fees would be settled. She signed through tears, believing it was the only act of love she could offer. Alexander was presented with a profile of a healthy newborn boy born to a young woman who had chosen a better life for her child. The process was swift, taking just under 6 weeks. He named the baby Leo, and the child became the sole light in a home shadowed by loss. To the outside world, it was a beautiful story of redemption, but the foundation's efficiency masked a brutal reality. Elena, physically recovering and emotionally shattered, was given a one-time cash stipend of $5,000 and a list of domestic service agencies. The life she had carried for 9 months was gone, and the system designed to help her had instead rendered her invisible. By 2007, fate engineered a cruel proximity. Alexander, needing live-in help to manage his estate and care for his toddler, hired a new housekeeper through an elite service. When Elena Vasquez walked into the interview, her resume listing her time at the Havenbridge Foundation's administrative office, Alexander saw only a qualified candidate. He never made the connection. For Elena, that first day was an earthquake of the soul. The child in the high chair was her son. The name, Leo, was the one she had whispered to him in the hospital. She almost fled, but a fiercer instinct took over, to stay close, to watch over him. She got the job. For 17 years, Elena performed this silent ballet of agony and devotion. She was the one who soothed Leo's nightmares, packed his lunches, and tucked his notes into his backpack. Alexander, busy expanding his empire, saw only exemplary service. He came to trust her implicitly, even granting her access to his private study and wall safe for household accounts. The boy adored her, calling her his Nina, a derivative of madrina or godmother. The irony was a private torture. Every birthday she celebrated with him was also a memorial of the day she let him go. She lived in constant fear that a mannerism, a shared allergy, or a glimpse of an old photo would betray her. The first crack in this fragile facade appeared not from a look or a word, but from a piece of paper. In the spring of 2022, 17-year-old Leo needed his original birth certificate for a prestigious overseas study program. Alexander, wanting to handle it personally, went to his study safe. He retrieved the ornate document folder, but as he lifted it, a smaller, faded slip of paper, tucked behind the folder's lining, fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt from the Havenbridge Foundation, dated November 3, 2005. Itemized were the finalized adoption processing fees for one male infant, Vasquez, but handwritten in the margin, in a script he didn't recognize, was a note. Mother's outstanding balance cleared per Schedule B, confidentiality affirmed. Vasquez Elena, discreet post-placement employment facilitated per agreement. Alexander stood frozen in the silent study. Vasquez, his housekeeper's name, the date aligned perfectly with Leo's adoption. The term post-placement employment turned his stomach. The elegant narrative of charitable adoption curdled into something cold and transactional. He thought of Alina's unwavering dedication, her refusal to take vacations, the way she looked at Leo sometimes, a look he had mistaken for simple affection. It was something else entirely. A terrifying question now hammered in his mind. Had he saved an orphan, or had he, with a fortune and a signature, unknowingly purchased a woman's child and then hired her to serve him? The walls of his perfectly ordered world seemed to bend inwards. He slowly turned the receipt over. On the back was a phone number and a single chilling word: facilitator. Alexander stared at the handwritten number, his mind reeling. This wasn't a simple administrative error, it was a trail. With a cold, methodical fury that he usually reserved for corporate rivals, he picked up his private line and dialed. The voice that answered was smooth, professional, and utterly unprepared for the storm about to break. "Identify yourself," Alexander demanded, bypassing any greeting. After a stunned silence, the man on the other end, who gave the name Gerald, tried to deflect, but Alexander recited the receipt number, the date, and the name Vasquez. The facade crumbled. Gerald, a now-retired liaison for the Havenbridge Foundation, confessed under pressure. He revealed that what they called facilitation was a systematic process. Vulnerable birth mothers, often immigrants or women in financial crisis, were steered toward closed adoptions with wealthy clients. Part of the package, for some, like Alina, included help finding stable employment afterwards, a way to ensure silence and a sense of ongoing care. It kept everyone comfortable, Gerald said, his voice trembling. The mothers were nearby, the fathers had help, the children wanted for nothing. Alexander ended the call, his hands shaking not with anger, but with a profound, sickening horror. He hadn't rescued an orphan. He had participated in a gentler, more elegant form of human trafficking. For 3 days, Alexander moved through his home like a ghost, observing the life he had built. He watched Alina gently scold Leo for tracking mud on the marble floor, her touch lingering on his shoulder. He saw the easy, unthinking trust between them, a bond he had always appreciated, but now saw with terrifying clarity. The love in her eyes wasn't employee loyalty, it was a mother's love, strained through a sieve of grief and enforced silence. The weight of his complicity was suffocating. He had been the beneficiary of a cruel asymmetry, all the power, none of the truth. The confrontation happened in the one room Alina never entered, his private study. He summoned her there one evening after Leo had left for a friend's house. She entered, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression politely curious. Then she saw the receipt lying centered on his desk. The color drained from her face. 17 years of careful composure vanished in an instant, replaced by raw, unguarded terror. "Senor Alexander, I can explain," she whispered, her voice breaking. "What is there to explain, Alina?" he asked, his own voice dangerously quiet. "That you gave birth to my son, that you've been watching him grow up while I paid you a salary, that this foundation, this facilitation asterisk, made you a permanent ghost in your own child's life." Each question was a hammer blow. Alina crumpled into the chair opposite him, tears streaming silently. Her confession poured out, not of malice, but of desperation. The fear of deportation, the crushing medical debt, the agency's promise of a beautiful life for her baby and a fresh start for her. They had framed the housekeeping job as a kindness, a way to be secure and still be near him. "I only wanted to make sure he was safe, to see him happy," she sobbed. "I never meant for you to know, I never meant to hurt anyone." In that moment, Alexander's fury met an immovable object, her profound, undeniable love. His next question changed everything. "Did you ever try to find me? Before the agency? Did you know who I was?" Alina looked up, confused. "No, senor. They showed me a picture of a family, but the faces were blurred. They said the father was a good man, grieving his wife. I didn't know it was you until I walked in that first day." This was the pivotal revelation. The agency hadn't just facilitated the adoption, they had engineered this impossible proximity. They had placed the birth mother inside the adoptive home, creating a live-in ghost and guaranteeing a lifetime of silence through dependence and fear. The cruelty of the design took his breath away. The immediate problem was Leo. His study program application deadline loomed. Alexander Reeling procured the official birth certificate through his lawyers. It listed parentage, Alexander Thorne by adoption, and birth mother unknown. It was a legal fiction, a document that erased Alina completely. Holding it, Alexander felt like a fraud. How could he give this to his son, knowing it was a lie? But the deeper issue was biology. A gnawing suspicion took hold. If the agency was this corrupt, what else had they hidden? Were the medical histories accurate? He needed undeniable proof. He arranged for a private at-home DNA test, a simple cheek swab for him and Leo. Under the guise of a comprehensive family health genomics profile he was investing in. The results would take a week. Those 7 days were an excruciating limbo. He avoided Alina, who moved through the house like a shadow, her eyes perpetually red-rimmed. Leo, perceptive and 17, noticed the tension. "Is everything okay with Nina?" he asked one morning. "She seems really sad." Alexander could only offer a hollow reassurance. The foundation of his son's world was cracking beneath him, and he was powerless to stop it. The DNA report arrived via encrypted email. Alexander opened it in his study alone. The summary was unequivocal. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. He was Leo's biological father. The shock was absolute, a physical blow that knocked the air from his lungs. The timeline rushed back. In his grief after Claire's death, there had been a brief, reckless relationship with a woman he'd met at a charity gala. It had meant nothing, and he had ended it quickly. He never knew she was pregnant. She must have been one of Havenbridge's other clients. The adoption wasn't a stranger's charity, it was him, unknowingly reclaiming his own biological son. The agency had known, they had to have known. They had taken his child, sold him back to him, and hired the birth mother to clean his house. The scale of the betrayal was so monstrous, it felt unreal. But this revelation created a second, even more devastating secret. Alina was not Leo's biological mother. The receipt, her confession, her pain, it was all real, but based on a lie she herself had been sold. The agency had likely told her the baby was hers, using her maternal bond to ensure her compliance and silence. She had spent 17 years mourning a child she never bore, loving a boy she believed was her own, trapped in a gilded cage of someone else's making. Her tragedy was infinitely deeper than he had imagined. Alexander now held two earth-shattering truths. Leo was his biological son, and Alina was a victim of a fraud so profound it had stolen her identity as a mother. He had to decide which truth to reveal, and to whom, knowing that either one could destroy the people he loved. As he sat there, the intercom buzzed. It was Leo, his voice bright with excitement. "Dad, the courier just dropped off my passport stuff. Can you bring the birth certificate up? I need to scan it right now." The sound of his son's voice was a bucket of cold water. Alexander snatched the fraudulent birth certificate from his desk. "I'll be right there," he managed to say, his mind screaming with two truths he could not yet speak. In that moment, he made a fatal decision. He would tell a partial truth to protect the whole, unaware that this single choice would trigger a chain reaction far beyond his control. He met Leo in the hallway, handing over the document. "Listen, son," Alexander began, choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. "This paperwork, it's more complicated than it looks. The adoption agency we used wasn't entirely ethical. I've discovered some disturbing things about how they operated." Leo's excited expression faded into confusion. "What does that mean?" Alexander placed a hand on his shoulder. "It means the information on that certificate might be incomplete. It means the woman who gave birth to you might have been pressured into a situation she didn't fully understand. I'm looking into it, and I need you to trust me." He saw the flicker of betrayal in Leo's eyes, not about the adoption, but about the secrecy. "How long have you known?" Leo asked quietly. "A few days," Alexander admitted. "And Nina, does this involve her? Is that why she's been crying?" The directness of the question was a knife twist. Alexander nodded, a single grim confirmation. "She is involved, deeply, but I need you to let me handle this. Don't confront her, not yet." This half-revelation was a time bomb. Leo, a curious and tech-savvy 17-year-old, now had a mystery to solve. He didn't confront Alina. Instead, he retreated to his room with his laptop and the birth certificate. The name, the Havenbridge Foundation, yielded little from a simple search, a defunct website, a few old charity listings, but Leo dug deeper, using forums and archive sites. He found fragments, a lawsuit from 2009 that was settled out of court, a newspaper editorial criticizing predatory private adoption practices, and most chillingly, a Reddit thread from an adoption search group. One post from 5 years prior read, "Looking for any info on Havenbridge. My mom was told her baby died at birth in 2006. I found my birth records last year. I was adopted through them. They lied to her. While Leo fell into the digital rabbit hole, Alexander knew he had to stabilize the immediate crisis. Elena. He found her in the staff sitting room, staring blankly at the wall. He sat across from her, the DNA report in his hand. Elena, he said, his voice softer now, I have the results from a test. She looked up, bracing for a blow. Leo is my biological son, he stated. The news didn't surprise her. It merely confirmed the cruel logic of the wealthy taking what they wanted. But then he continued. The test was between me and Leo only. Do you understand what that means? She blinked, the implications slowly dawning. It means you are not his biological mother, Alexander said, each word heavy with pity. The agency lied to you. They used your situation, your pregnancy scare or whatever it was, to bind you to this arrangement. You believed you were his mother for 17 years because they needed you to believe it. Elena's reaction was not relief, but a deeper, more profound shattering. The core of her identity, the pain that had given her purpose, the love that had sustained her through servitude, was revealed as a fabrication. She hadn't lost a son, she had been weaponized as a living monument to a loss that wasn't even hers. A low, guttural sound of agony escaped her. Why, was all she could whisper. To control you, Alexander answered, his own anger simmering. A real mother, believing her child was in the house, would never leave, never speak. You were the perfect safeguard. He made a promise then. I will find out who did this, and I will make them answer for it. But Elena, I need you to stay for Leo. He needs you, and I need your help to understand what was done to us. But the Havenbridge Foundation, or the people who operated it, were not relics of the past. Alexander's phone call to Gerald had sent ripples through a network that preferred to remain dormant. 2 days after his conversation with Elena, a man in a crisp suit appeared at the estate's front gate. His name was David Corrigan, and he presented himself as a legal representative for the interests of the former Havenbridge board. He was invited into the study, where he exuded an air of polite menace. Mr. Thorne, we understand you've been revisiting your adoption file. These are closed records for a reason, to protect all parties, especially the child. Alexander was ready. He slid a copy of the receipt across the desk. This seems to indicate my housekeeper was a party you intended to protect, by making her a permanent employee in the home of the child you told her was hers. Corrigan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Misunderstandings from a different time. Ms. Vasquez received exemplary post-placement support. You received a healthy son and a dedicated employee. Everyone benefited from our facilitation. The cold, transactional language was a confession in itself. Alexander leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You will provide me with the complete, unredacted file on Leo's adoption, including the identity of the biological mother and all financial transactions. You will dissolve any confidentiality agreements pertaining to Elena Vasquez, or I will use every resource at my disposal to drag every facilitation you ever did into the light of a courtroom. Corrigan stood, his composure cracking slightly. A court case would be messy for you. The legitimacy of your parenthood could be challenged. The boy's stability would be shattered. And Ms. Vasquez's immigration status, which was so helpfully arranged, could become precarious. We merely suggest you appreciate the elegant life we helped construct and leave the scaffolding in the past. It was a direct threat. As soon as Corrigan left, Alexander called his security team to increase patrols and monitor Elena's movements. The system was fighting back. The pressure erupted from an unexpected direction. Leo, armed with digital breadcrumbs and a growing sense of injustice, he confronted Elena not in anger, but in shared confusion. He found her folding laundry, her movements robotic. Nina, he said softly, my dad told me the adoption agency hurt people. Were you one of the people they hurt? Elena looked at the young man she had loved as a son, her heart breaking with the truth she now knew. She told him her story, the one she believed, that she had given birth to him, that she had been poor and scared, that the agency offered a solution and then a job to be near him. She told him about the guilt, the silent watching, the love that had to wear a mask. She did not tell him Alexander's new revelation. That was not her truth to share. Leo listened, tears in his own eyes, and hugged her tightly. The bond between them, though built on a lie, was real in that moment. But Leo now had a mission: to find his real birth mother, the woman he believed Nina to be, and uncover the full story. This teenage investigation collided with Alexander's legal offensive, with catastrophic results. Leo, using his father's name and a story about genealogy research, managed to get a clerk at the city records department to locate a birth notice he shouldn't have accessed. It listed a baby boy, mother's name redacted, father's name blank, born at a hospital outside the city on a date that matched his birthday. But the attached admittance form, partially scanned, had an emergency contact scribbled in the margin, a name and a number. The name was Gerald. The number was the same facilitator number from Alexander's receipt. Leo, thinking he had found a conspirator, called it. Gerald, already spooked by Alexander and Corrigan's visit, heard a young voice asking about a birth record from 2005. Panicking, assuming Alexander was using his son to gather evidence, Gerald called his old protector, David Corrigan. The message was clear. The Thorns were not backing down. The son was now digging. Corrigan's response was swift and brutal. That evening, an official-looking letter arrived via courier for Alina. It was from the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. It stated that her permanent residency, granted under a now-defunct humanitarian program, was under mandatory review due to potential irregularities in her initial sponsorship. The letter advised her to seek legal counsel and prepare for a possible hearing. The threat had been made real. They were going to take away her life in America if Alexander didn't stand down. Alexander held the letter, feeling the walls close in. He could fight the agency, but could he fight the entire immigration system they seemed to manipulate? He looked at Alina's terrified face, then thought of Leo, who was now emotionally invested in a version of the past that was also a lie. He had tried to control the truth, and in doing so, had set loose forces that threatened to tear his family apart from multiple sides. He had one card left to play, a dangerous one. He needed to find the one person who could unravel the entire scheme, Leo's actual biological mother, and he had to find her before the agency silenced her, before Alina was deported, and before Leo discovered a truth that would make him question his very existence. He opened his laptop, the name of the hospital from Leo's discovered record glowing on the screen. The final piece of the puzzle was out there, and the race to find her had just begun. The hospital record was a dead end. The mother's name was officially sealed, but the attending physician's name was listed, Dr. Anya Sharma, retired but not unreachable. Alexander's private investigators found her in a quiet coastal town. When he called, he expected another wall. Instead, he heard a weary sigh of recognition. "I've been waiting for this call for 17 years, Dr. Sharma said. She agreed to meet, but only in person and only if her identity was protected. Alexander flew out the next day. Over tea in her sunlit garden, the retired obstetrician unburdened herself. She remembered that night vividly. A young woman, disoriented and alone, was brought in by a well-dressed man who claimed to be her cousin. The woman, semi-conscious from medication, delivered a healthy boy. But the man produced paperwork, a private adoption agreement, and insisted the birth certificate list mother unknown. Dr. Sharma had protested, but the hospital administrator, a man with ties to the Havenbridge Foundation, overruled her. "I was told it was a sensitive case, that the mother was unstable and the adoption was a mercy," Dr. Sharma explained, her voice thick with regret. "I took a private note. Her name was Claire Thorne." The name hit Alexander with the force of a physical blow. Claire, his wife. The timeline spun in his head. Claire's sudden illness, the fatigue, the nausea he'd attributed to grief, had been a pregnancy she'd hidden. The trip to visit her sister for 2 months was a confinement. She must have been terrified, knowing the child wasn't his, determined to spare him the pain. The agency she turned to in desperation wasn't a charity, it was a predator. They had taken her child, told her it was going to a wonderful family, and then, in a twist of cosmic cruelty, sold the boy back to her own husband. Claire had died of a heart condition, yes, but Alexander now understood the unspoken part. She had died of a broken heart, carrying a secret so vast it consumed her. He returned home carrying this devastating truth. He called a family meeting in the living room, Alexander, Leo, and Alina. The air was thick with anticipation and fear. Alexander began at the only place he could, with an apology. "I have made terrible mistakes," he said, looking at both of them. "I tried to control the truth to protect you, and I only caused more damage. I know now who Leo's biological mother is." He took a deep breath. "It was Claire, my wife. Your mother, Leo, in every way that matters." He explained what he had learned, painting the picture of Claire's fear, the agency's manipulation, and the monstrous coincidence that led Leo back to his own biological father. Leo sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that the mother he'd only known from portraits had carried him, had loved him enough to try and secure his future. The idealized story of a saintly adopted mother was replaced by the tragic human story of his real mother. Then Alexander turned to Elena. "And you, Elena, were the second victim. The agency needed a plausible birth mother to present to me and a grateful, dependent employee to place in my home. They found a vulnerable woman and convinced her the child was hers. They used your love as a chain." He slid a new document across the table, a legally binding declaration, drafted by his lawyers, stating that Elena Vasquez was recognized as Leo's legal guardian in the event anything happened to Alexander, and that a substantial trust fund was established in her name, granting her complete independence. "Your freedom is not negotiable. Your place in this family is not conditional on a uniform." Revelation changed everything and nothing. The biological mystery was solved, but the emotional bonds remained, now reforged in the fire of truth. Leo looked from his father to Elena. The woman he thought was his birth mother wasn't. The father he thought had adopted him was his biological parent. The mother he'd mourned had given him life. It was a whirlwind, but through it he saw one constant, the love in the room. He stood up and hugged Elena tightly. "You're my Nina," he said firmly. "That's the only truth I need." With his family on a fragile but honest new foundation, Alexander turned his full fury on the Havenbridge system. He didn't just file a lawsuit, he funded an investigation, leveraging his fortune and media connections. David Corrigan and the remaining facilitators found themselves facing not just a civil suit, but a federal investigation into fraud, human trafficking, and immigration corruption. The story, when it broke, was a sensation. Other families came forward, adoptive parents who'd been lied to, birth mothers who'd been coerced, and even a few other Elenas, women who had worked in homes under similar pretenses. The elegant facade crumbled into a scandal of national proportion. In the quiet aftermath, a new rhythm emerged in the Thorne household. Elena kept her rooms in the house, but she was no longer a housekeeper. She became officially family. She enrolled in community college courses in counseling, wanting to help others who had experienced similar trauma. Leo, armed with the full, complex truth of his origin, decided to defer his overseas program for a year. He wanted time to process and to be close to the family he had almost lost. The final surprise came on a bright Sunday morning. Alexander was going through Claire's old personal effects, items he had sealed away after her death. In the back of her jewelry box, behind a velvet lining, he found a sealed envelope with his name on it. Claire's handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened it. "My dearest Alexander," it began, "if you are reading this, the worst has happened, and I have failed to find the courage to tell you the truth myself. I am pregnant. The father is a ghost from a past I regret, and it does not matter. What matters is that this child is innocent. I have arranged for him to have a life, a good life, through people who promise discretion. I cannot raise another man's child next to you. The lie would poison everything we built. Forgive me for my weakness, my love. I have left instructions that he should be placed with a kind family far from here. Please, if you ever somehow learn of him, do not hate him, and try in your heart to forgive me. All my love forever, Claire." She had never known the agency sold him to Alexander. She died believing her son was living elsewhere with strangers, a permanent, aching hole in her heart. Alexander wept, not just for Claire, but for the infinite layers of pain the agency's greed had manufactured. He showed the letter to Leo, and for the first time they grieved for Claire together, not as a saint on a pedestal, but as a flawed, loving woman who had been trapped by a cruel system. The mansion was quieter now, but the silence was no longer filled with secrets. It was a peaceful, earned quiet. Alexander had set out to uncover a lie about his son's origin, and in doing so, he had uncovered a network of exploitation, reconciled with the ghost of his wife, and redefined the very meaning of his family. He learned that love isn't defined by biology or legal documents, but by the choice to show up, to protect, and to forgive. The teal uniform was gone, replaced by the unbreakable, chosen bond of a family that had faced the worst truth and decided to build something real from the ruins. The story of the maid and the millionaire was over. The story of Alexander, Leo, and Elena was just beginning. The story of Alexander, Elena, and Leo is more than a tale of a shocking secret. It is a stark lens focused on the invisible architectures of power that shape our most intimate lives, our families, our identities, and our very sense of belonging. We began with a simple, devastating question. What happens when the person who cleans your home is, in truth, the ghost of the family you thought you built? The answer unraveled a conspiracy of the heart, revealing how love and desperation can be systematized, packaged, and sold. At its core, this is a story about the true cost of secrecy. Studies, like the one we referenced earlier, confirm what this narrative illustrates. Secrets about origins don't protect, they poison. They create a foundation of sand. Leo's world shook not simply because of the biological truth, but because the trust that held his reality together had been engineered to be false. Elena's entire adult life was spent performing a role in a play where only she didn't have the script. The system counted on her silence, leveraging her vulnerability and her love as the perfect enforcement mechanisms. This case also exposes the dark gray areas of private adoption and surrogacy, where vast sums of money meet profound human need. The Havenbridge Foundation didn't break obvious laws, it bent morality until it snapped, creating a clean, quiet transaction where there should have been a messy, human process. It treated the primal bond between mother and child and the grieving hope of a father as variables in a financial equation. They were facilitators of a profound disconnection, all wrapped in the language of charity and fresh starts. But the ultimate revelation here is not about corruption. It is about redemption. Redemption did not arrive through a legal victory or a public expose, though those things happened. It arrived in the quiet, courageous decision to face the unbearable truth. It arrived when Alexander chose empathy over anger, when Leo chose connection over confusion, and when Elena, though her motherhood was a fiction, was embraced for the love that was utterly real. They teach us that family is not a document or a bloodline alone. It is a choice, repeatedly made, to see one another truly and to say, "You belong here." Their journey forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own world. Who are the invisible people in our lives, and what stories are they holding? What elegant, comfortable arrangements in our society are built on someone else's silent pain? The echo of Elena's story can be heard in the struggles of domestic workers worldwide, often immigrant women, rendered invisible and vulnerable by systems that benefit from their silence. In the end, the mansion on the hill became a home not when the secret was buried, but when it was brought into the light. The uniform was just fabric, the love was the truth. Alexander learned that the greatest wealth is not in accounts, but in the fragile mended bonds sitting at his kitchen table. They remind us that no matter how far we stray or how tangled the lies become, the path back to each other is always lit by the simple, brave act of telling the truth. If this story of shattered secrets and remade families resonated with you, share it with someone. Because somewhere, someone might need to hear that even the most beautifully constructed lie is a cage, and that the key was always in their hand. For more deep dives into the human stories behind the headlines, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We'll see you next time.